Today I thought it'd be interesting to have a look at food defence management. It's an age-old concept. For example, people in high positions all over the world for many centuries have had food testers. However, it's becoming more of a requirement for food businesses to have a look whether they're manufacturers, retailers or caterers and identify whether they need to take any extra precautions. Just so that we know what food defence is, it's all about preventing deliberate contamination and threat to the food industry. It's things like looking after malicious attacks, and these might come from ideologically motivated attacks, or they might be politically motivated, but it's about stopping that and their threat. Another term commonly used is food terrorism. And the World Health Organization defines this as an act or threat of deliberate contamination of food for human consumption with chemical, biological or radionuclear agents for the purpose of causing injury or death to civilian populations and or disruption of social, economic or political stability. The difference between food defence and food safety is that food safety is all about preventing accidental contamination, whereas food defence is about preventing contamination which is deliberate and where someone's trying to hurt somebody. So you have to think all about the risks and controls a little bit differently. Some of the reasons why people might deliberately contaminate food can be complex, but it may be linked to the high economic value of the food industry, the fact that it's a very easy target, and so you can get lots of people at once because everybody has to eat, and it's relatively easy to infiltrate. So it's quite an easy target, and those people who may wish to contaminate food maliciously include criminals, disgruntled employees who may feel they've been unfairly treated, or maybe they're under the threat of redundancy, alienated or extreme groups wishing to disrupt the food chain and to gain publicity, maybe extreme groups who, for example, have some religious or animal welfare or environmental considerations and they wish to make a point. So there's lots of times when little things like this can actually happen. Whilst it isn't common, it is a real threat, and examples include an insecticide which was put in deliberately into some ground beef. This insecticide contained nicotine, and they put it into 1,700 tonnes of ground beef. 111 people were ill, and all because the person actually just had a grudge against his supervisor. In another case, 750 people were ill when the Bhagwan Sri Raj niche political party deliberately contaminated some salad bars in restaurants, in 10 local restaurants in America, and they did this with salmonella, and this was an attempt to incapacitate the voting population of the city so that their own candidate would win an election. So that's another example of how something could happen. There are also many other examples, including yoghurt being contaminated with rat poison deliberately, which ended up with 2 young children dying in a kindergarten in China. Oranges being injected with mercury. This was a political group who wanted to cause problems with Israeli oranges, and they did so successfully. Glass being placed into baby food, which caused a huge recall, and even mice being put into the ceilings of rival restaurants' premises in an attempt to give them an infestation and close them down. Today we don't really have time to look in depth about how to develop a food defence plan, but ideally it should include conducting a risk assessment, and a group of people should really be involved. Obviously, if you're just a one-man band, there's not an awful lot you can do about that. The first stage would be to identify how vulnerable you are, so you need to consider just how much effort you need to put into this. You need to be looking at whether you have any sensitive products and processes, whether manufacturing processes are easy to deliberately interfere with them, whether the people you employ, for example, are likely to cause a problem. For example, are they stressed, are they easily influenced, or are they potentially compromised in another way? All of this will help you to build a suitable plan to work from. Then you need to assess the vulnerability of your operation, and therefore you need to start to look at the perimeter. Are there any gaps in the perimeter? Is it easy to get in? What's the security like? Where do people park their cars? You need to think about the actual building. Are doors locked? How easy would it be to get in through the roof? What about windows? Is it multi-sited, so therefore it's quite hard to identify where everybody is at once? Are there key processes where maybe the plant's uncovered, so it would be easy to put something into the product at that point? Is delivery and receiving of goods at the other end, how are you going to make sure they're safe? Have you got decent systems with regard, or is there a gap with regards to receiving goods and ordering goods? Could it have been contaminated on the way? And the people who you work with, both managers and workers and contractors, do you control them adequately? Are people challenged? Have we considered how we might be stressing them? For example, if we're going on to short time or an unusual shift, have we got disgruntled employees? Have we got stressed employees? Have we got people who might be easily influenced? All of those things need to be considered, and that will help us identify our vulnerability. And a good idea is to get a checklist through, and you can get these off the internet and have a look down and say, right, do I do that, or is there a gap there? And that will help you then to start building the next part of your defence plan. After that, we're really looking to control, and we'll look at that in a second. But you need to always be focusing that the purpose of a food defence plan is to reduce the risk of intentional contamination. Your actions need to make the vulnerable elements of the operation more secure, and the goal is to provide the protection in the most economical way. There's no point in spending £1 million to have no benefit. You've really got to look at what can I do that's quick and easy and will really keep my food a little bit safer in relation to malicious contamination as opposed to accidental contamination, which I think we're all reasonably good at nowadays. 3 simple things that you can consider, known as 3 L's, are to light it, lock it and limit access. These 3 things will help you to start to defend the food very well, whether you're in a restaurant or whether you're in a manufacturer or a retail. Keep the exteriors well lit, keep the interiors well lit, because when you've got dark, shady areas, that's when people could cause problems. Keep things locked. Make sure that you can't physically get into things. That includes equipment, it includes storerooms, it includes vehicles. Keep it locked, and then therefore it can be kept safe. Another thing that you need to consider locking again is things like chemicals as well, because then it's harder for people to put things in. It's easier for people to notice if things are wrong, much easier to do it. And also limit access. So have it so that certain areas are restricted to certain people. Don't just let anybody through. Consider how you're going to control visitors, how you're going to control agency workers, how you're going to control contractors, and how you're going to limit their access. So consider looking at those sorts of things and working out how you're going to do them, because all of these will help you to control much more effectively and more economically than if you put in some of the. As we've already said, it's important to make sure that whatever we do is fairly economical. And if we look at going from the most economical to the least economical and start at the most economical type of things, it's about perhaps changing a procedure. So when we're employing new staff or agency staff, do we check references of the people who are coming? Do we have a visitor signing in log? Do we update our specifications to include a little bit of food defence? Have we validated work permits when contractors come? Have we put passwords on things, in particular things like anything that's done on a computer, which might relate to a specification or a recipe or something along those lines? And just simple things like these will mean that everything is a little more secure. Next, with regards to economy, it's technology and equipment. So considering things like dusk-to-dawn lighting out externally, making sure that our locks are suitable, that there's more than one lock, that we have audible alarms maybe as well when doors are open, and that maybe we have barriers so that it's harder for people to ram raid somewhere or get through a back door easily. So barriers such as fencing such as iron bars on windows, etc., will be very helpful externally and maybe at the back of a restaurant or something like that, to keep things just that little bit safer and to prevent someone just nipping in, dropping something in and nipping out again without anybody being able to see. The least economical is actually looking at including extra people. So, but it might be necessary, but things like employing more security guards, but remember then that you did need to get them checked themselves. Are they making sure that they have been trained, taking up their references as well? But also little things might help that through a process, for example, having two-person tasks every now and again. That can be quite a useful thing to do. So nobody's ever working in a vulnerable area on their own. That could work very well. These are just some examples of changes that could be made. There are many more, but they give an overview of some of the things that you might wish to implement. Just to sum up then, when we are developing a defence programme, we need to identify the likelihood, and we need to consider the sensitivity of the product, the countries we're selling to or buying from, the manufacturing methods, the people, the length of the supply chain as well, and any vulnerable areas within that. And that leads us nicely into assessing the vulnerability. We need to be looking again at our supply chain, the perimeter of our premises, the premises themselves, the plant we use, and equipment we use, the processes that the food goes through, the people who actually handle the food along the way, our actual product, is it sensitive or could it be tampered with, is it an open or closed product, could it be considered, and our brand, could that be compromised in some way easily via social media or via something like that, could cause a problem within the brand. We then need to control and monitor. And here we need some simple, practical and economical and effective controls, some of which we've already discussed. And it's very important that these are communicated as well, so that people do know what the controls are there for and they do know to challenge somebody who may be in an unauthorised area, etc. So all that's very important as well. And then there's one last part, and that's developing a response plan should anything actually happen, unfortunately, and our controls haven't worked, etc. So then we'd need to make sure that we're able to do something should it go wrong. And here we need to consider how we're going to contain the problem, what we're going to do with the actual food that's been harmed, but also we need contact numbers, emergency contact numbers, business contact numbers for people within the business, our customers, suppliers. We'll need a map so that emergency services know where to get into, maybe the water supply or the gas supply if that's been contaminated, where all the problems the problems are. Also, we'll need some form of diagnosis, which we'll probably need to use experts for. So we need to perhaps preempt and pre-think where they may be coming from, and they will also help us then with regards to how we're going to dispose of safely of the food depending on what it is, and obviously a recall plan. Now, a lot of big companies will already have a recall plan and a crisis management plan in place, but they perhaps need to look back and just check that it is allowing for things like food defence and deliberate contamination as opposed to anything else, and that works suitably for them. For smaller businesses, then they probably won't have this in place, so it's worth them thinking in advance of the response they're going to do to help prevent some sort of knee-jerk action in the end. And that ends the presentation. Obviously it's a much bigger subject than this, as always, but I thought it would be really good because it might promote some discussion. It's quite interesting, a little bit different, and something that I think that tutors are being asked a little bit more about, especially with food safety, because it does link directly, although it's slightly different.